Welcome, everybody. Today we are talking to Sean Patton. Sean, I'm so happy you're here because I have been reading your book, and we're going to talk about the book a little bit more. But I've been reading your book, and it's A Warrior's Mindset, The 6 Keys to Greatness. And I have probably more highlights in this book than I've done in any of the business books I've read lately.
All right.
So,
Awesome.
yeah. So it's going to give me it's given me so much to think about and sort of ponder on that I'm looking forward to kind of exporting those notes and going back to it and thinking a little deeper. But so if you don't mind, when we start, let's go ahead and let me get you to introduce yourself because you've got an extraordinary military history and I want to do it justice. And therefore I'm going to let you introduce yourself and then I'll take it from there.
Well, that sounds great. Well, thank you for having me on, Elaine. I am really excited for this conversation. Yeah, my background, I was in the Army for 14 years. 4 of that was at West Point as a cadet. I graduated in 2005, spent 10 years as an active duty officer. The first 5 was in the infantry in the 101st Airborne Division. I was a rifle platoon leader and scout and sniper platoon leader. And then I went to Army Special Forces, which is the Green Berets. And I was lucky enough to command 2 different Green Beret detachments or A teams while I was in. And I got out in 2015 to explore entrepreneurism and, see what this freedom thing that everybody was talking about was all about. So I did that, and, I had ups and downs for that. I had my first business failed. I went through that. I got my MBA, started another business. I own a jiu-jitsu business. I do Brazilian jiu-jitsu and martial arts. And now that kind of runs itself. And for the last few years, I've been focused 100% on working with business leaders as a coach and speaker.
All right. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why I let Sean introduce himself. All right. I got to tell you, when one of the first things that I was in your book, one of the first things that I was reading was kind of a gut punch. And it's probably not maybe the thing that you would have picked up on, in a business book, first of all. But there's a line early on in the book, and it says, "We appreciate your thoughts, prayers, and thanks. But what us veterans truly ask of any American is one simple thing: be an American worth fighting, killing, and dying for." And that kind of took my breath away because it flips. We're so used to seeing someone, in the airport, in the restaurant, say, "Oh, thank you for your service," without taking a moment to understand everything that is behind that. And that it's still today. This is not something that happened in Vietnam. It didn't happen in World War II. I mean, it did, but it's happening today. Our American troops are fighting and dying, overseas and in foreign countries to give us the opportunities that we have here. And I think one of the biggest opportunities as I continue to read the book is the opportunity of leadership, because to me, leadership can solve this divide that we see in our country right now. And, I really worry about that. And I look around and how do you fix it? The gap is so big. And then it was this obvious moment when I'm reading your book going, it's all about leadership, people. It's all about leadership. And if you have someone like you who can kind of guide you through that process, then almost anything becomes possible. So it's that moment of, it's the gut punch, but it's also that moment of hope. So my question for you is, I'm thinking all of this starts with a little introspection and self-leadership. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say, that you can't really influence others, because that's often what I'm focused on in this podcast is cover to cover influence. How do you influence others if you can't kind of manage yourself? So do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for pulling that out. is something that's very near and dear to my heart, and um, I believe it. And you know, I'll get to your question, but I would. This is going to sound like completely unrelated, but I'll bring it back to something that it just recently happened, and my wife and I watched all the Harry Potter movies during our break, right? So we watched all the Harry Potter movies, and there's a moment where Harry, I don't know, it was in the middle of it, but he came back from basically like a big battle. I think it was after like Cedric, one of the kids, like his friend died. And he was in this big battle. He had like been through all this, for lack of a better term, trauma, like combat, right? And he comes back and he's walking the sides of the halls, and all the kids are like running and playing and like going to see their families. And I might get emotional here in a second, but it took me back to that person you were talking about in the airport, and like going to places where violence, where instability or insecurity is the way of life.
Yeah.
And I remember just coming back and like seeing those kids like in the airport playing and happy families, and they're not a care in the world, right, about their basic needs or their safety. And I just remember thinking like, it was worth it. Like it's worth it.
Wow.
It's worth it to go be that person who sees those things and has to do things so that we have this bubble and this opportunity that you mentioned in this country. And so the hope is that we just don't take it for granted, that the people here don't take that for granted. And the way they can do that is not to go out necessarily and put themselves in harm's way or go do some miraculous overseas thing or, whatever, go volunteer for the Peace Corps for 3. Like what you can do is take advantage of the opportunities that we have in this country and become that person that when we're walking through the airport that has the family, or that is creating opportunities for others, that is, you mentioned, unifying others and being a positive influence inside of our culture. That's someone that is worth that sacrifice. And so that really, in my mind, does start with, who are you? Like, who are you becoming? And are you living up to your full potential, given the fact that none of us are self-made? And if you're listening to this podcast, and if you're in America or Canada or you're any of these types of countries, my guess is you are in the top probably 1%, but definitely top 10% most fortunate people on the planet. And I'm sure you've worked hard, but it has nothing to do with what you've done. It has everything to do with all the generations that have come before us that have created these conditions so that we have this freedom and this opportunity. And so I really have this belief that to whom much is given, much is to be expected. And so I see it as leading yourself, becoming the greatest version of yourself, maximizing your impact on others, and maximizing your own experience of your own life is an inherent moral obligation because of the privilege that we've been granted based on where we live and the time in history we live.
How do you get to a point where you can fully appreciate that if you haven't experienced the things that you're experiencing? Now, I've done a fair amount of travel, so I have some inkling because I've seen other cultures. But for those who maybe haven't traveled quite as extensively, how do you build an appreciation for that? How do you begin to understand that?
I think you can have access to read, to study, and to reflect, right? Like, it's one thing to say there's a civil war going on in Sudan right now, but like, if you take time for reflection, for meditation, like, can you imagine what it is like to like take 20 seconds, 30 seconds and picture being like in that environment, like imagine what that might be like. I also think so that's like one way you can just sort of like without going anywhere or doing anything, like reflect and think about it. I think that you also can do, I talked about in the book, though, the first key to greatness is perspective and gratitude. Like doing you don't have to necessarily reflect or think always on like all the bad things in the world. You can just focus on the positive things you do have, and really appreciate all the great things you have in your life, the freedom, the opportunities, the lifestyle, the relationships, whatever else that might be, your health. And I think just by reflecting on, it's really all of that to say that's an extreme example for where I'm coming from. I'm trying to give people a taste of it, but I think you can really do that through reflecting on the things that you're grateful for in your life, and just like we talked about in the book, and use that to motivate you forward. And the final thing I'll say on that is also, you don't have to go that far, right? Like you even live in Austin, I live in Nashville. I talked to my parents, and what were they doing on like Christmas? They were like, they're handing out, meals to, to people that can't leave their homes. Like, just they talk about just like going, that people who don't have their health, right, who are on oxygen tanks, who don't have any family to come see them, who don't have any of that. And then like, you don't have to go that far to, one, make a difference, but two, to find people who are less fortunate than you, and not to pity them or to feel superior or anything like that, just as a reflection, then to be like, oh man, look what I have. And then the next question is, what am I going to do about it?
I think it's part, what are you going to do about it? But then the other thing I think about from the book is kind of, how do you begin to, first of all, you experience your gratitude, but then you're also thinking about, how do I dream even bigger? How do I think even bigger? And you said something along the lines of, if this doesn't make your brain hurt, you're not thinking hard enough. So, for example, when you're coaching, what are you telling somebody if they're, if they're thinking small, if they're kind of, I don't know, if they're not leveraging all the advantages that they've been given? What do you tell somebody when you're coaching through that?
That's a good question. I have them think on and reflect on these two maxims, and then we'll sort of judge against that. So I think there's two sort of guiding life maxims that I've come to, which are maximize my own experience of life, maximize my impact on others. Like, those are my guiding principles. So if I'm ever trying to make a decision, like, do I go left or I go right? Do I say yes? Do I say no? It's like, is it going to maximize my own experience of life, or is it going to maximize my impact on others? If it's a yes, you do it. And if it's no, you don't. And that doesn't mean, right, burn yourself out or go crazy or anything. But that's like a lens to then look through. So then I'd say, in your business, let's like look at this one area. If you're not thinking big enough, you're just like, you're settling. Then I have them reflect on, like, what would the maximum output be? Like, what would it look like for, what is the impact you're having now in your business? We're helping, 1,000 clients, or where I've employing 20 people at, these wages. I'm having this impact in my community. Like, what would that look like if what does maximum look like? So maybe what does 10 of that look like? What does 100 of that look like?
Yeah.
And then find a level they're comfortable with. And then we can start taking steps toward that. And what I would tell people is, if they're struggling with, like in the book, we talked about perspective and gratitude being the first. That's the reason it's the first key, because that is the fuel. And I had, not usually with my clients, but I have a friend who's, not an entrepreneur and not a senior leader, but just, we were having a discussion on this a couple of years ago. And she said, well, kind of a version of your question. She's like, well, I don't, maximize, like, people don't think like that. Like, what if I'm struggling with that? I'm like, then you're not reflecting on your gratitude enough. Like, if you're settling, you need to spend more time thinking about what you could do and what's the delta, right? Like, what's the delta between what you're settling for and what you're capable of? What's the difference in there? And how many people are out there that you could positively impact their life that you're not going to because you're settling? And are you okay with that?
Yeah. And that kind of blends into, maybe in a slightly different way, but it kind of blends into that personal responsibility part, because as you go on this this big journey, there's also a fair amount of big responsibility that's going to come with that. And being able to own both the good stuff and the road, the potholes, whatever you run into along the way. And I would think personal responsibility. I mean, as I look around and I see the divisions, in the country, I also think that a lack of personal responsibility is another rabbit trail on the list of some of the challenges that we're running into. So again, what am I going to do if I'm dreaming big? What part is that personal responsibility going to play in getting there?
No, you're exactly right. And, you mentioned the unity piece, and I think we can all play a bigger role in that. I think that, if I have to go on a little tangent on like veterans, that's it. So, I'm speaking to a general audience here. Sort of my key message with when I talk to a veterans group about leadership is the fact that we're uniquely positioned to be a unifying force in this country.
Yeah.
And we are not doing, I don't think we're doing a net positive good if we're on the side of creating division and dividing different sects of this country and being an absolutist around our opinions and our ideas and beliefs. Like, because as veterans, we're in this unique position where, like, if you take maybe not the furthest, but pretty far left, pretty far right, whatever, right? Or, whatever side of any issue you take, if you've got like, you have to be pretty far out there to not like, so you can usually get behind a veteran cause. Like, it's like, we didn't go out and fight, for a political party, right? We fought for the Constitution. And so if you're under the Constitution, we're in that unique position. So I think we have this like inherent authority that we can speak from. And on top of that, when we led in the military, we weren't in a position, like we had people of all backgrounds, all socioeconomic backgrounds, all geographic backgrounds, all different political beliefs. And we all came together under like one mission set. And so we've seen that work. And that's how I think it translates to your point on the civilian side or, the business side, that whatever tribe you're building, right? Like whether that's people inside of your sphere of influence, content you're putting out, whether that's your actual employees or your clients or whatever that is, like whatever tribe or message you're building, is it one of unity? And it's a place where, despite differences of all kinds, ideological or physical or whatever, you can create a space where people come together and see where they're alike, that highlights one mission, one cause, make an impact on the world. And you can do that whatever size, tribe that you have.
And I've heard you say, that you make a point, and I think this kind of speaks to personal responsibility too, but that you make a point of reading both sides of an issue to go find, the media that is reporting both sides of an issue, because there's not one evil media that's all out to destroy something. There's somebody reporting the thing that you want to hear. Because you also spoke about the scientific method, and that you're making an assumption and you're trying to disprove it, find ways to disprove it. But most of us, and I'll include myself, just because we get in the habit, we're looking for confirmation of what we think and what we believe, and not so much looking for, the facts that might disprove that. So I like what you said about the veterans and how uniquely positioned you are, because oftentimes, even when I'm talking to somebody about their book ideas and how they might publish a book, one of the objections I hear all the time is, oh, it's already all been written. There's nothing new to say on my topic. But back to your point, when you were saying every single individual is unique. Their experiences are, their approaches to problem solving is different. And what your experience was might speak to me differently than someone else's. So if you're in it to win it with providing the support and the information to others to kind of elevate them, then then that reframes it. It reframes the story that we're telling ourselves and how we openly approach sharing information and interpreting information that we hear from others.
Yeah, I mean, confirmation bias is real. It's, we have this reticular activating system that looks, when we're thinking about something, we see it, right? If you're thinking about buying the red truck, all you see is red trucks,
Yeah.
right? We all know that, right? And we kind of know that when it comes to something simple like that, like, oh my God, I didn't know everyone drove an Audi since I've started looking at Audis or whatever. But we don't realize, like, but we're also finding that with even if we looked at completely neutral information, right? Like, even if we just looked at it, we would still be drawn to the things that we agree with, that we're familiar with, that we've seen before. And you add on top of that this amplifying feature that if you're looking at something online, especially in social media, you have an algorithm that's actually amplifying that for you, that all the things you want to know and things you spend more time, it's just going to give you more of it. So you're just like really getting this pigeonholed, small chunk of information. And where I think that, someone who has great ideas they want to share, whether that's in a book or that's in speaking or that's wherever they have a message, one that's not gonna come from continuing to reinforce every belief system and thought that you have. It's going to come from challenging that. And I think that's really I'm a big fan of conscious leadership and conscious capitalism and things like that. And it's really about that. It's about living intentionally and consciously. So rather than, if you're list whatever, if you're a CNBC, CNN, I don't know, Huffington Post person, that's all you ever like, try, maybe it's painful, look at something from the other side, or better yet, like look at stuff from overseas. Like, I'll read a lot of stuff from Britain or the EU, to even prove this happens, not even just what you read, but one thing that I had to do when I was in special forces training was learn Arabic. So one thing that makes Green Berets different is we operate by, with, and through an indigenous force most of the time. So we're a small team that lives with an indigenous force somewhere. So there's different groups that are assigned regionally. So there's a group in Europe and they all, speak Russian and German and French. And then, so they can go into Africa because a lot of African countries speak French. And then there's a group in the West Coast in Japan that speaks Chinese and Japanese. Everybody on my team spoke Arabic or Farsi. And so when we would do our language training, one thing we would do is we would read the same news article in Al Jazeera, and we'd read it in English and read it in Arabic. And my God, were they different stories.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. So depending on what their audience is, so they're pandering just on the language. So the way that they describe the same news outlet described the same story, they were pandering to who they thought was reading it, right? So you just have to be very careful and intentional. And that's why it's so important for us as adults, but especially as we teach and younger generations, like critical thinking, questioning, and like you mentioned earlier, treat everything like a science experiment. And the reason I love that scientific method is because people think that, or maybe a thought would be, well, if someone makes a hypothesis and they do an experiment to try to prove it right. That's not true. You have a hypothesis and then you run an experiment to try to prove it wrong. You're trying to break your hypothesis every time. And so if you just take every belief you have, if you are open enough to do that, one, I think it makes for a richer, more exciting life, right? And you get to grow. You get to actually grow in mindset over time, instead of, if you always are just looking for confirmation, you're actually shrinking your worldview over time. So you're going to have a smaller worldview at 60 than you do at 30, which does happen to a lot of people if you're not conscious about it. But imagine if it could go the other way, and you could be have a more open mindset. You could understand multiple sides of an issue, and you could see things different ways by trying to constantly be like, I believe this now. And instead of looking for things to confirm that, I'm going to look for ways that actually contradict my belief. And then, oh my gosh, does that mean that it's wrong? Or does that mean that there's sort of two truths, right? Which is Most of the world is gray. And to bring this back into leadership, if you are the type of leader who wants that confirmation bias, you're going to be surrounded by, yes men and yes women who want to just, yes, we're going to do that way. We've got one way of looking at it, and you're going to have huge blind spots and you're going to get hit. And so as leaders, we have to, if you want to be a leader, you have to be more conscious about exploring, and you don't have to agree, but you have to understand different sides of an issue if you want to maximize your impact, and if you want to have really a resilient organization that's not going to have its blinders on when it comes to certain different issues or maybe perhaps weaknesses in your business model.
Wow, that was so good. And I think about how that kind of leads to your overall mission. So when you plan your mission, as a military team, you are looking for the ultimate outcome. You're looking for what changes because you were there, correct? Take me through that as a business leader and tell me what that looks like as I'm planning and I'm leading my team. How do I apply that to this business leadership scenario?
Love that. So the first thing we would do, the first paragraph in the operations order is situation, right? So the first thing we do is look like, let's all get on the same page on what now looks like. Yeah. Because, right? So that's the first thing we have to do is like, what does now look like? What does our business look like? What does the market look like? What's out there, right? And then we're going to look at, in the military, we'd call it end state. And when we would define an end state, at least in the simple, like tactical level mission, right? Not at some national level theater thing, but we define it in terms of enemy, friendly, and terrain. So we'd say at the end of this, what do we look like? Like, where are we at? What forces do we have? What are we doing? What is the enemy like? Right? It was degraded. We took away this ability to maneuver down this route or whatever else. And then we would say terrain. So like geographically, like where is everything? So that's just like that's a military concept, but you would still look and say, all right, if we have an effort we want to put forward, or we want to influence this area, we see an opportunity, let's define the end state. So when we're done, like what does success define what success looks like here? And, that can be some sort of big, bold mission, or it could be more tactical. Like we just want to grow in this one area. We want to grow in this region, or we want to grow this one business, effort or channel. But clearly defining that. So now and this is going back to, it's interesting because this is kind of coaching 101, right? Define current state, define desired future state. And then you would say, well, how are we going to get there? And we base that off of what resources do we have? What limitations do we have? Time, money, capabilities, whatever that might be. Like, so what resources do we have available to accomplish this? What restrictions, limitations do we have? And based on that being our situation, then we would develop multiple courses of action. So as a business, that's what I would say is, I would say develop at least 3 distinct courses of action of how you can accomplish that. And then you can compare those and say, what are the pros and cons of each? What are the risks? What are the rewards? And what's going to most likely to get us as close to our desired future state as possible? And then you execute, you put resources against it, and you start moving forward.
I like it. And I just enjoy listening to you talk about these things. And I heard you say earlier that you do talk to veterans groups and things. Who else do you talk to, and what types of presentations and things are people interested in hearing? Because I could just listen to you talk. So I'm just curious.
No, that's a great question. So, usually I go and I've talked to you, at leadership conferences for companies or, larger business conferences. And with those types of groups, it's sort of one of two categories. Either it's more around the interesting part of the book, right? So to go back to this, so the book, Awareness Mindset, 6 Keys to Greatness. The first 5 keys are all self-leadership. It's all about you. Yeah. To your point, right? You brought that up. Like it's, if you can't lead yourself, at West Point, the first thing you learn, the nation's premier leadership institution, you show up, they don't put you in charge of 40 people. For a whole year, you're just in charge of you, right? And the idea is you have to be able to lead yourself before you can lead others, right? And we could, and I can go over you. I'm sure you have examples of, leaders in one area, but they're awful in another area of their life, or they can't get their own, crap together, and that's their limiting variable. Like you're never going to be able to lead others better than you can lead yourselves. And also, because we're not influenced by people who can't lead themselves, right? Like, you see someone who's not self-managed, who's not self-regulated, who doesn't have dreams and goals, but not pushing themselves and not accomplishing things and not treating people right. Like, that's all self-work. And if you don't see that in the person you're following, you're not following them. Like, you may be managed by them. You may have authority over you, but they're not a leader. They're just a manager, right?
They're just a boss.
Just a boss. Yeah. Yeah. So, and then the sixth key is leadership. And so the first five are about leading yourself, becoming the best person you can be. And it's a constant process. And then once you have that in place, then the sixth is this leadership, which is amplifying your greatness, right? Maximizing your impact on others. So I say that because there's sort of two categories that I'll talk to groups about. One is, how do we, my keynote I'm giving the most now is called Lead Yourself First, Unlock the Greatness Within. And it's really sort of an approach on those first five keys in the book. So self-leadership. And the other one would be leading others and how leading an organization. And so I'll talk about sort of the steps, what I call like the pyramid to greatness. So as an organization, where do you focus at first? What's the foundation? What's the next step? And the next step and the next step? And what do you have to master in each one of those to sort of create a winning organization? So usually one of those two. But anytime I get a chance to talk to a veterans group, especially any veterans group, but a veterans group that's trying to be senior leaders that are trying to influence and make a big impact, or any transitioning veteran that are transitioning out of the military, if I get a chance to talk to those groups, like, I'm there to support them with however I can with any of my experiences.
Yeah. That's awesome. I'm always curious, how has publishing the book changed the way you do business, changed your coaching, changed your speaking? What changed because of the book?
So, and I would be interested maybe in your opinion, because I doubt there's one right answer on this, like the right way to do it, right? Or maybe there is, and that's why you hired Elaine to help
there
you.
Is
okay,
no
okay, yeah, one way, right? For me, it was, I started working with, I got my MBA, I got my business running itself, my other business, and I started coaching. And as I started coaching leaders, actually, one of my first clients was a Fortune 500 company. And so I started working with some fairly senior leaders instead of a larger organization. And these people have been successful. They're in their, late 40s, 50s, early 60s, whatever. And when we would get to topics around like what I would call like pure leadership, like influencing other people, and developing people, and I got a lot of blank stares, Elaine.
Oh no!
Right? Like when we talked management, we talked business outcomes, and we talked all that stuff. It was like, oh yeah, we do this, and here's our processes, and and then it's like, okay, let's talk about like how are we developing leaders of other humans and yourself. And there was a lot of confusion, and I had a lot of in the military, leadership development is very structured. Which is the way to do it. And the thing that I like to help businesses do is create a leadership development program, because I think that's critical for culture when you get to a certain size. But in the military, you sort of take it for granted that we have that. Most businesses don't do that, right? Like you're a good senior manager. You've been here long enough. You kind of get it. You seem like you got some big ideas. Now you're a director. No one's like, all right, now as you move up, here's the difference between what you did before and what you did now. And here's the new expectation. And here's the function that a director plays in the organization. They don't get that. And so, I got a lot of blank stares around leadership, and especially around self-leadership. And they didn't have these systems and structures. And so for me, I had these different ideas I was like throwing around, but I was like, I talked with my business coach, and it was really around, I need to write this book for me. And he literally told me, he's like, I hate to tell you this, man. He's like, you got to write a book. And I'm like, dang. Because I was just like so busy. I was like, I knew I was going to have to eventually, but I don't know if I'm ready. But what a book helped me do was it helped me take all these different concepts and ideas that I just had in the ether that I was just like throwing stones and making things happen.
Yes.
And it forced me to make that into coherent framework and really make sure my ideas and my thoughts supported each other, challenged it. Was there contradictions? Was there holes? And of course there was tons, right? There was tons of places where like, I just thought, well, you're here. And so the next thing's here. And people are like, no, there's something in the middle. And in my mind, I just made the leap, but there was missing something in the middle, right? There was holes in the logic or the justifications. Or I just had these things that I just believed or thought, or in my mind knew because I just did it. But if you hadn't done it, you asked me earlier, like we talked about those experiences overseas, like, well, if I don't have that, well, now I have to come up with a framework or a way or other examples, through either logic or case studies or whatever to put this whole framework together. And so on the front end, writing the book may have, like the process of actually writing the book may have been the most impactful thing for my business as opposed to even having the book.
Interesting.
And
how
then
long did it take you? What was your...
it took me, and I was pretty disciplined. It took me a little over 8 months.
That's good.
Yeah. I wrote 2 to 3 hours, every day, 6 days a week for 8 months. And just did it. I will say that I didn't start, or I started with kind of a lot of things. And so a lot of it was less coming up with maybe new things as opposed to just like organizing all these other ideas. Yeah. But then afterward, again, whether it's speaking or coaching or anything else, I will say sometimes, and people hate to see this, like having a book and having a good book, not like some, not just like a pamphlet that like AI wrote for you, but having a good book that people like has opened a lot of doors, just having that, because they know that you've put the time and effort in through it. And then I have gotten booked by clients and other people because they saw the book, read the book. And then the third and final one that's the most rewarding is I've had people talk about the impact of the book for them personally. Yeah. And, if nothing else, like that's been the biggest reward, has been other people telling me the impact that book has had and how it's changed the way they've thought about themselves or they've implemented things and it's enhanced their life. And it's like, there's nothing we're doing more important than that. Right.
And I'm willing to bet you weren't anticipating that personal impact piece when you started writing the book. Correct?
No, I mean, again, started writing the book. So I was like, I just have all these, I need to make a complete framework for me to work off of. And I did not anticipate, I didn't anticipate that. And it's really, I published a book a couple years ago and it's, there's different ways. And this is why I mentioned like different ways to do it, right? There's one way I think, which is like, maybe you get a big enough audience through whatever other channels you have or a position you have in life. Maybe you're a CEO of a big company or you're whatever, maybe you're famous in an area of life and you sort of already have a built-in audience. And so you like drop a book and everyone's like, wow, like you got a bunch of people reading it. For me, it was kind of the opposite. It's like, I mean, I had like friends and family, but it's been this like slow burn that more and more people, even my book sales had, initial but then it's in like, but it's this slow burn as I've talked to people, as I put out stuff, people found me. And so it's been cool that it's this gift that keeps giving, hopefully to the world, but, selfishly back to me as I've had different people come and say, I read your book. This is my takeaway. I mean, I gave my book to my son. I had a partner at a major firm that just hired me to speak at recently. And he, on our one-on-one, we were just talking before the event and he mentioned he had a younger brother who's a veteran who for years now has been sort of struggling with the transition and finding himself. Yeah. And so he got the book, met with his brother at holidays, gave his book to his brother and I've never met this guy before. And he's just like, this brother was like, Sean Patton? And he was like, yeah, he's speaking at my event. He's like, oh, I can't believe you actually got to talk to him. And I'm like, I have no idea who this person is. Somehow in their, in their little world, I'm a bigger deal, and that's cool. He gave me the book. He read it, offered to have a call with him, and, got him. He's got like a morning routine now. And like, he's like talking about how he's done so much better and he's following the principles of the book. I mean, just little things like that are just like, that's why you have to, that's really the fuel that keeps you going when you run into the potholes that you mentioned before that are inevitable.
Yeah.
Anytime you try to do anything great, like, if you think about anything, you think about anything in my life, and I'm probably in yours and the listeners, like anything that you're truly proud of, that's like lasting, that is defining for you, that means something to you, was hard. Like, it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
And so, and it's just worth it. I mean, I'm getting ready to be a parent for the first time. And you're like, I'm sure, like, yeah, like raising kids, right? Hard. Having a great marriage, hard. Starting a company, hard. Writing a book, hard. But it's those things in life that it's the effort you put into it that, and a lot of times, make it so worthwhile and life-changing for you.
Yeah. Well, Sean, people are going to want to find you. How do they find you?
So they can find me at SeanPattonSpeaks.com. My coaching company is NoLimitLeaders.com. I've got a podcast called No Limits Leadership. You can find me there. And also I'm on LinkedIn. I'm the most active in terms of social on LinkedIn. So find me there, shoot me a message. I'd love to have a conversation.
Good deal. Well, we will make sure that we put all of those links in the show notes. So thanks so much for being here today. And I will make sure everybody can find you on that book as well, because I'm one of those people that I think it's going to have a lasting impact on.
Oh, thank you, Elaine. I appreciate that so much. And thank you for your support and having me on today.
Thanks, Sean.